In various creative mediums throughout history, you'll occasionally have a figure who elevates that medium by being the most creative, prolific, or even just the loudest voice. Elvis Presley certainly didn't invent rock music, but we still call him the king of rock and roll all the same. The same can be said for the fabulously mustachioed Oregonian Will Vinton, often called the father of claymation.
Will Vinton is a clay animator who's really into his medium.
The concept of clay animation has been around in some form or another since William Harbut invented plasticine way back in 1897, but it wasn't until Vinton's work in the 70s and 80s that claymation really became a part of the public zeitgeist. However, unless you're a hardcore animation nerd, you probably haven't even heard Vinton's name until now. In fact, even if you're just a casual movie fan, you are much more likely to have heard of Travis Knight, CEO of stop-motion animation studio Laika, who produced films such as Coraline and Kubo and the Two Strings. You know, wonderful, lauded films. But you don't see people running around dropping labels like King and Father of Anything on Mr. Knight. So here's the real question. If Vinton truly is the father of claymation, why haven't more people heard of him? To understand the world of stop-motion animation and claymation as a subset, we gotta go back in time. Will Vinton attended the University of California, Berkeley in 1966 as an architecture student, just a year after the campus was rocked by massive student protests under the free speech movement. With continued student activism, the birth of the Summer of Love, and the rise of the Black Panthers in nearby Oakland, Vinton had his family's 16mm film camera shipped to Berkeley and began documenting the wild energy of Northern California's counterculture movement. He completed 3 feature-length documentaries that toured various local film festivals. Apart from capturing the new voices of the left in Berkeley, Vinton also began experimenting with clay modeling inspired by his favorite architect, Antoni Gaudi. Along with his roommates, especially sculptor Bob Gardner, Vinton would turn massive amounts of clay into various flowing structures while also filming the entire building process. After insistence from friends, Vinton decided to harness Gardner's sculpting prowess and his filmmaking abilities to make his first animated short film, Culture Shock. The pair entered the short into the Berkeley Film Festival and walked away with first prize. After college, Vinton and Gardner parted ways for a while, with Vinton moving back to his native Oregon, getting married, and beginning work as a freelance filmmaker. After a few years of honing various production skills, Vinton still hadn't forgotten his experiments with clay. He called up Bob Gardner and convinced him to move to Portland to make something bigger and better than their experiments in college. Using Vinton's Bolex Rex 5 camera, the pair worked for nearly a year and a half to complete an 8-minute clay animation short film called Closed Mondays. Vinton submitted the film to a local film festival, but the short film that had taken thousands of hours of the two men's lives was outright rejected almost immediately. The judge didn't even screen it, recalls Vinton. Just wasn't his cup of tea or whatever. Feeling defeated, Vinton showed the film to a theater owner friend who, as a favor, agreed to screen the short before a full-length film. Closed Mondays became a bit of a local phenomenon thanks to this short theater run, and Vinton and Gardner were able to rally the support to submit the film to more and more festivals. The icing on the cake was a nomination and eventual win of the Academy Award for Best Animated Short, the first for a stop-motion film. The Oscar win opened doors for Vinton and Gardner to make some real money with their clay animations, but the pair parted ways while working on a 30-second ad for a beer company not much later. Vinton established Will Vinton Studios and hired a handful of his old architecture and artist friends from college as employees. With his new studio, Vinton completed 3 clay animation short films that served as a bit of a testing ground to perfect the studio's unique style. Vinton filmed a documentary of the process of making the 3 films, and for the documentary's title, he coined and trademarked the term claymation. That allowed him to set his work apart from the sea of new imitators. Vinton Studios' success continued into the 1980s with the release of their first feature film, The Adventures of Mark Twain, supposedly the first film to have every frame comprised entirely of clay. The film didn't find much success, but Walter Murch, legendary film editor and consultant on Mark Twain, approached Vinton about working with him on Murch's debut directorial gig, the Disney film Return to Oz. Vinton and his team animated the Gnome King, the film's antagonist. While the film was a flop, Vinton received another Academy Award nomination for Best Visual Effects. During that same decade, Vinton began to make real inroads into the commercial game. 1986 saw the premiere of two of Vinton's most memorable and recognizable characters. The Noid, a bit of an oddity and a common sighting on lists of weirdest marketing campaigns, was nevertheless successful and helped establish Vinton's reputation in national advertising. The California Raisins, on the other hand, were Will Vinton's true mainstream breakthrough. Commissioned by the California Raisin Advisory Board, the series of claymation ads featured anthropomorphic raisins singing Marvin Gaye's hit "I Heard It Through the Grapevine." The characters were so popular that the original series of ads spawned multiple studio albums, TV specials, and even a Saturday morning cartoon series. Vinton's success in the 80s was capped off by a commission from CBS for 3 primetime holiday specials that would bring Will Vinton Studios into the 90s and a new era. Shortly after the release of Will Vinton's final CBS holiday special, Portland rapper Chili T burst onto the hip-hop scene. Okay, maybe not burst, but thanks to his privileged upbringing as the son of a successful businessman, Chili T was able to access state-of-the-art recording studios, a record deal with MCA, and the production skills of the Bomb Squad, known for their work with Public Enemy, Ice Cube, and Slick Rick. Secluding himself in his parents' New York penthouse apartment, Chili T recorded his one and only album, Get Off Mine. Even with a top-notch production team, a major record label, and his father's connections and money, Get Off Mine was a critical and commercial failure. With his already, let's just say slim chances in the rap game dwindling, Chili T was faced with finding a new path in life. So get off mine. Won't you get off mine? With Chili T's very brief moment in the rap game coming to an end, Will Vinton continued to grow his studio and portfolio by incorporating CGI into the studio's repertoire. This mid-90s Chips Ahoy commercial incorporated all of Will Vinton Studios' forms of animation, and is one of the most memorable ads from my childhood. Vinton struck gold again with an ad campaign for M&M's, featuring the CGI anthropomorphic candies interacting with the likes of blues legend B.B. King and the big man Santa Claus himself. That's right. The very same man who created the California Raisins also created the CGI M&Ms, whose ads we still see every Christmas and before every single movie at AMC. Even though CGI had clearly become a vital part of the studio's commercial output, Vinton was still a stop-motion animator at heart. Nearing the end of the decade, Will Vinton Studios was hired to animate the new Eddie Murphy TV project, The PJs, an adult animated series that would premiere on Fox in 1999. The demands of such a large cable network project led the studio to head in 2 new directions. First, to speed up their workflow, the studio ditched plasticine and embraced the much more durable latex foam for the character models in the PJs. With a new material at hand, Vinton dubbed the term foamation for the new project. This new style would be continued on another TV show, Gary and Mike, smaller in scale but equally as demanding for a studio already stretched thin. To further meet the hugely increased scope of these new projects, Will Vinton Studios was in dire need of a cash infusion, even though revenues were at an all-time high. For the first time ever, the studio looked outward for investors, and were lucky to get a chance at a meeting with Phil Knight, the billionaire founder of Nike and a fellow Portland resident. Knight toured the studio and was so impressed with their work that he decided to cover the entire investment round of $5 million, assuming a 15% stake in the company. Knight remained mostly hands-off in the following years, but as it turns out, he did have one simple request. At 25, Chili T graduated from Portland State University, now going by his much more respectable birth name, Travis Knight. With a new passion for animation, but basically no job prospects, things were still looking a bit bleak for good old Travis. Thankfully, Papa Knight came through in the clutch again. As it turns out, Travis's dad had just invested a pretty significant amount in a local animation studio. With his 15% stake in Will Vinton Studios, Phil Knight's big request was a simple one, an internship for his son. Travis started his career doing the most basic of animation grunt work at Will Vinton Studios, including rendering the beard hairs on Eddie Murphy's PJs character. Fellow employees at the studio were unaware of Travis's relation to the studio's new investor, but his supposedly unassuming nature and actual talent led to him becoming a respected member of the studio's animation team. With 2 well-received TV shows on the air, a big league investor, and the studio reaching a high of 400 employees, Will Vinton Studios seemed to be on top of the world. But, as with so many things in the early 2000s, the unprecedented catastrophe of 9/11 had deep impacts on the industries in which Will Vinton Studios was so deeply ingrained. Both the PJs and Gary and Mike were dropped from their original networks in 2001 and would be completely off the air by 2003. Their advertising work all but vanished in the months after 9/11. These 2 factors, along with some serious mismanagement, such as opening an LA penthouse studio and leaving it unoccupied for months, led the studio shrinking down to around 100 employees. New CEO Jeff Farnath stepped in to try and right the ship, but 2 years later and $7 million in funding down the drain, Farnath crawled back to Phil Knight for further financial help. "If I'm gonna put my money into a hemorrhaging company, I'm gonna own it," Knight told Farnath. Investing more of his own money, Phil Knight assumed majority ownership of the studio and control of the board, appointing Nike veterans alongside him. His final move of the silent coup was to appoint his son Travis to the board of directors. Travis Knight, with only a few years of animation experience, was now technically Will Vinton's boss. A mere 6 months later, Will Vinton stepped down from the board under immense pressure from Phil Knight. He was then fired from his animation position at the studio and was left with little more than a $125,000 severance check. Over the next few years, the senior Knight poured $180 million of his own money into the company, and with Will Vinton gone, rebranded the studio as Laika in 2005. Still less than a decade from being hired on as a lowly intern, Travis Knight took the position of Vice President of Animation for Laika. At Travis Knight's suggestion, Phil Knight hired stop-motion animation legend Henry Selick to lead the new studio on their first film. In 2009, Coraline was released. Based on the Neil Gaiman novella, directed by Henry Selick with Travis leading animation, Laika's first feature film was a critical and commercial success, grossing over $160 million and garnering the studio its first Oscar nom for Best Animated Feature. After the success of Coraline, the Knights were able to continue the growth of the studio and produce 4 beautifully animated films over the following decade. Each was nominated for an Academy Award, although financial success has varied. Travis made his directorial debut with Kubo and the Two Strings, Laika's most critically acclaimed film to date, although it did fail to replicate the financial success of the previous 3 Laika films. Travis was able to spin his successful directorial debut into a new gig outside of Laika. In 2017, he was hired to direct Bumblebee, a spin-off prequel reboot of the Transformers franchise. What resulted was the most critically lauded Transformers film to date, but also a solid $468 million box office total, more than the total box office of all of Laika's films combined. While now serving as the CEO of Laika, Travis also has future live-action directing jobs in the works, including a potential adaptation of the classic series The $6 Million Man. It's hard to imagine a much better outcome for a guy who used to go by Chili T. After unceremoniously being forced out of his own company, Will Vinton brought a suit against Phil Knight for wrongful termination. Vinton accused Knight of firing him as part of a grand plan to give the company to his own son, though Knight openly admitted that he invested in the studio from the start with Travis in mind. The suit was eventually dropped, with Vinton completely losing ownership of everything he had built over his decades-long career. His beloved studio, his various intellectual properties such as the California Raisins and the M&Ms, and even his trademark for the term claymation. Vinton pressed forward over the following years though, forming Free Will, a small animation studio more in line with the early days of Will Vinton Studios. He kept busy dabbling in smaller animation projects, teaching animation classes at a local art school, and consulting for animation studios and animation software companies before officially retiring in 2008. Unfortunately, he passed away on October 4, 2018 after a 12-year battle with multiple myeloma, a cancer of the white blood cells. 2 careers offset by decades and following inverse trajectories. It's a lot to take in, and you probably have some strong feelings one way or another. But I just want to close with this. If I had given you the resumes of these 2 guys without all the backstory and the drama, how would you really feel about them? Lots of awards on either side, both have produced some beautiful art, and a solid amount of money was made in the process. Yet it is really easy to feel a little uneasy about Travis Knight, knowing what we know now. it's hard to appreciate the work of someone who was essentially given everything they needed to succeed. But at the same time, how confident are you that you could sustain nearly 2 decades of success no matter how well-funded a company you were gifted? And even Will Vinton admitted that he was a bit naive in how he let others run his company into the ground. It's a shame that the two couldn't coexist, and that this whole process ended up being so destructive. But I think it's more important to appreciate what we had before and what we have now, just as 2 separate things, Go watch Laika's movies, because it's good stuff made by people who I think actually care. And tell more people about Will Vinton. Send them this video, please. Jam out to some dope-ass California Raisins ads. Just, maybe skip that chili tea jam. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Newstalgia. Tried something a little bit different on this episode, a little more complex, maybe dipping our toes into controversy a bit. So I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, we really appreciate you letting us know by talking to us in the comments, leaving a like on the video, subscribing to our channel so we can make more content like this in the future. Anyways guys, we will see you in the next video.